Hi folks, this is Jay. Hope you're okay today. Love to everybody out there, and hope everybody's okay. This is an old camera I'm using for today. Um, a camera I used in the Zwima days. We're just going to have a video um, on responding to an atheist called Dan Courtney um, on the resurrection. Is the resurrection of Jesus fact or fiction? And Dan Courtney is an atheist. I was scheduled to debate him. I called the debate off. Um, I'm not going to go into details. People know the reasons why. It's not to do with him specifically, but to do with the shenanigans of the atheist community that goes on. Um, but he's done a video of 15 minutes, and I would like to respond to it. Before I do, um, I want to recommend some books. This is Gospel Truth: Answering New Atheists by Paul Barnett, published by IVP. If you're a Christian and you're worried about what the atheists are saying about the resurrection of Christ, this is a really good book. Gospel Truth, Paul Barnett, Answering New Atheist Attacks on the Gospels. Okay, it's a very good book, so I recommend that. Secondly, this is a really good book. Who Chose the Gospels? And this is an extreme academic work, alright? Very, very intricate and detailed, very specialist work. So only if you want to really debate atheists or really engage with atheists on this issue, get this book. Who Chose the Gospels by C.E. Hill. It's endorsed by Don Carson, so it can't be bad. He's a great scholar. Published by Oxford University Press. And this guy looks at the Gnostic Gospels and all the various theories that have gone out about the original Gospels, and he's a fair-handed scholar. He's not like coming with an agenda. He's trying to do his best to be as objective as possible, and it's really, really helpful work. It's a standard work that you need to get hold of, really. Excellent book. This book by Michael R. Licona, The Resurrection of Jesus. If anybody is going to debate or talk about the resurrection, you need to get this book. It's a standard book now in the scholarly world. You need to get hold of this. This is going to set the agenda for the next 5 to 10 years in this debate. Okay? I don't agree with everything of Licona, but his first 160 pages on history and the role of history and how we do history and how that relates to Jesus studies is worth the wait in payment. Like I said, I don't agree with everything. He's a modernish evangelical. He's a little bit weak on inerrancy, but really helpful in this debate. So you need to get hold of that. So that's The Resurrection of Jesus, Michael R. Licona. Okay, IVP, I think it is. IVP Academic. Alright. Another standard work in this debate and study is the historical figure of Jesus E.P. Sanders. You can't really even start to debate this issue without having looked at Sanders. Okay, so that is for those who are serious academics in this area, you need this book. Alright. Then another leader in this area is Gezer Vermees, who's a Dead Sea Scroll expert, Jewish guy, doesn't agree with the Orthodox position, but is a very helpful work to get the opinion of someone who's scholarly but he's not into the atheist agenda, but he's trying to look at things in an objective way. He doesn't agree with us, he doesn't agree with evangelicals, but it's all about thinking, it's all about good scholarship. So, you know, you need other stuff that disagrees with you to read. So I would encourage you to read that. And actually, he does say some surprising things that will surprise you. Yeah. Now this guy, I'll just get back to this guy. Now this guy, E.P. Sanders, is not evangelical, but he was the major leader in this debate about the historical Jesus and the resurrection. So you'll read, if you get older E.P. Sanders, you will, as a Christian, you will be shocked because he will rip the Christian faith to bits. But at the same time, you will be encouraged because he will come up with things that will confirm your faith. So this book is for critical thinking in the area of historiography and Jesus, okay? It's not there to just pander to you. It's there to make you think. Well, I'm giving it you to think. Now, other resources that you need to look at. You need to go to Dr. Gary Habermas' website. I've read nearly all his material, watched all his debates. And read his PhD. Dr. Gary Habermas um, is what can I say? Is the leader in this area. Um, so type in Dr. Gary Habermas, the resurrection, and all his website will come up. Tons of resources there. So have a look at that. That will really, really help you. Another resource is William Lane Craig has done a lot of work on this. So have a look at William Lane Craig. Tons and tons of stuff by him on this resurrection. And just get all the. Sorry about this. I'll be with you 1 second. I'm just giving you the resources so that you can. Also, if you type in Alleged Contradictions in the Gospels, Part 1 by Dr. Timothy McGrew, McGrew, okay? Alleged Contradictions in the Gospels, Part 1, and then Part 2, there's another video. Dr. Timothy McGrew. And there's a whole stack of lectures that he does on the Gospels, on the resurrection, that are very, very helpful. So have a look at his stuff. It's on a YouTube site, but he is a proper scholar. Okay, so that's Gary Habermas. That's Dr. Timothy McGrew. Another scholar that you could have a look at. A few other scholars in this area that you need to look at, which I've looked at, is Dominic Crossan. He doesn't agree with evangelicals generally, but he's a leading expert in the historical Jesus and the resurrection. You need to look at him. Find his website. There are some good lectures there. You won't agree with him if you're a Christian, but if you're going to be an expert in this field or be competent in the field, you need to look at Dominic Crossan. You need to look at his colleague, Dr. Borg, I think it is. I've not looked at so much at him. I've only seen a few things of his. I'm more familiar with Dominic Crossan. But anyhow, they also reside at the Jesus Seminar, so that's one area. The other scholar that you need to look at is Dr. Bart Ehrman, Misquoting Jesus and Jesus Interrupted. These are books that touch on the resurrection. He's recently written a book on the historical Jesus. He's completely against evangelicalism, but there are a lot of things recently in his last book that have upset atheists on the historical Jesus teaching. So you need to get hold of him if you're going to be competent in this area. Also, you need to get hold of Dr. Richard Balcom. If you type in Jesus and the Gospels in YouTube, there are 4 lectures of his at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's a landmark scholar in this field. Also, if you go to his website, type in Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, Dr. Richard Balcom, and his website's full of really helpful material. Just to backtrack on the Bart Ehrman stuff, if you type into YouTube or into Google, Bart Ehrman Project, as you're reading Bart Ehrman, go to the Bart Ehrman Project. They're scholars that answer Bart Ehrman, so that will give you resources there, okay? Also, if you're worried about Bart Ehrman's textual criticism, type in Dean Bergen and in Wikipedia, and in Wikipedia at the bottom you'll find 2 volumes of the life of Dean Bergen and also some of his work. It's old work, but it's absolutely will really help you to take on Bart Ehrman if you need to in your own studies, okay? So the Bart Ehrman stuff, read Bart Ehrman's material, have a look at Dean Bergen, have a look at the Bart Ehrman Project that answers Bart Ehrman. Don't forget Dr. Balcom, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. Another scholar to look out for is Dr. Peter Williams. Have a look at some of his lectures. He's a massive scholar and he does some amazing scholarship. Have a look at him. He does some great stuff. What else is there? Who else is there to consider? Yeah, on epistemology and miracles, have a look at Dr. Keener. Dr. Keener's written a book on miracles. He's an ex-atheist. He's a giant scholar in New Testament studies. He's written a book on miracles. And that helps you think about the issue of David Hume on this issue, right? So Dr. Keener on his book on miracles is a good source material. So all that source material is scholarly stuff that I'm recommending to you. Half of it is against my position, half of it is for my position, okay? And that's what it's all about. It's all about getting you to think and look at the research and look at the source material to think for yourself. And I would also encourage you to read primary source material. In these debates with atheists, I've noticed that the atheist scholars, most of the time, oh, another thing as well, Ludemann is an atheist scholar. Have a look at Dr. Ludemann. He's an important scholar that you can look at on the resurrection of Christ. But source material is important. Primary source material. Read ancient source material. Read the Gospels. Read Paul's epistles. Read the ancient literature before the time of Christ, during the time of Christ, after the time of Christ. Read Tacitus. Read Josephus. Read these ancient source materials and discover things yourself. Don't just listen to scholars, okay? And go to the main scholarly sites where they have these primary sources. You can find them all over the place. There's a lot of universities that have good material, okay? So that's just source material for you to study this subject. Helping you to really look into things, right? We're not here just to win debates. We're here to educate and help people to think through these issues. Okay, so that's the first part of the video. Second part of the video, we're going to spend 15 minutes now. We're not into 15 minutes, but the next 15 minutes, to be fair to Dan, because he's done his video in 15 minutes, so we'll spend now 15 minutes reflecting on his video, okay? Okay. Dan Courtney basically says that it's beholden to the Christian to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Jesus rose from the dead. He gives 4 pieces of information here. He says that we have to prove as Christians that Jesus was an actual human being, that Jesus was dead prior to being placed in a tomb, that Jesus was placed in the tomb as described in Scripture, and that, number 4, Jesus was physically restored to normal function. Then we have to also give the proof that of the God concept, that God exists, that God is sufficient to the resurrection, and God is necessary for the resurrection. Okay. Then he says that he quotes Bart Ehrman, who says that contemporary accounts are the best for historiography. He then goes on to say that these accounts, the accounts of the Mormon of Joseph Smith with the golden plates, is very good history. We get primary source material of these eyewitness accounts, but yet we know it's all bogus. But yet this is early accounts and consistent witnesses, and it's better than the Gospels, and yet we know Joseph Smith's telling us a lie. Okay. Then he goes into contradictions in the Gospel accounts, such as the time of the Passover, the day of the Passover, the time of the death of Christ, who carried the cross, and etc. Then the final argument is that the resurrection didn't happen because Paul didn't teach a resurrection, he taught a spiritual resurrection. So that's basically Dan's argument. I'm just going to rebut it for the next 15 minutes, okay? First of all, he says we have to prove these 4 things about Jesus. Jesus was actually a human being, Jesus was died, placed in the tomb, Jesus died prior to being placed in the tomb, and Jesus was placed in the tomb, and 4, Jesus was physically restored. The first 3 points are already proved by history. If you knew the history of this topic, he'd know that the work by E.P. Sanders, who is the leader in this field, would not agree with the Bible, would not agree with certain things about the Gospels, but has said that the basic facts of Jesus, that he was a human being in history, in the first century Jew, that he died, that he was placed in the tomb of Arimathea. He accepts that. Dominic Crossan, who was a skeptic scholar, says that Jesus dying on a cross is the most well-attested historical fact in history. We know this from Paul's early source material, 1 Corinthians 15, which says, "Now I would remind you, brothers, of the Gospels I preached to you, which you received, in which you stand, and by which you are being saved, if you hold fast to the Lord I preached to you, unless you believe in vain. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for out of sin, in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day, in accordance with the Scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then all the apostles. Last of all, as an untimely born, he appeared to me, for I am the least of the apostles." Now this text, written probably in the 50s, 58, round in early mid-50s AD, scholars will tell you is rich in tradition and goes back to an earlier tradition of AD 33, 34. Okay, so we know from that passage alone that we have early historical source material of the death and the burial of Jesus Christ. Okay. Also we have the early church fathers, such as Clement, is another example of good historical source material, which is solid historical source material, and also extra source material that's not to the Bible, such as Josephus. Most scholars would agree that it has been tampered with, but his testimonium does tell us a kernel about Jesus' life. And then thirdly, Tacitus. A whole lot of Roman scholars will tell you that there's no dispute about that passage about how it talks about Jesus. Alright? We could say that, well, where did Tacitus get his source material for that? Well, we could say that about a lot of historians. The fact of the matter is, Tacitus would not have written that unless he had some good source material to back it up, okay? Because that's how good a historian he was. So, the basic facts are generally established, and also the basic fact that even Bart Ehrman will tell you that on the fourth point of Dan, Bart Ehrman, Dominic Crossan, E.P. Sanders, Gomez, we could go on and on, N.T. Wright, these are massive scholars, will tell you that the early church had visions of Jesus in the early first century. So the issue there is, what are those visions? Was it real? Was it a real resurrection, or was it an hallucination? The issue with psychological models is they don't fit the experience of the early church, because there were so many different sightings of Jesus at different periods, different places, in different contexts, to people, groups of people, individual, that no psychological model can answer all these various visions. So you can't answer the resurrection from a naturalist perspective. The issue with the resurrection is there are certain facts that we know. Number one, that women were the main sightseers of the resurrection. Now, why did the early church build its preaching on the resurrection on women, when women were not respected in the court of law? Their testimony was not respected. So why go around saying Jesus rose from the dead based on women's accounts? The naturalist explanation of the resurrection can't account for that. Secondly, as Gomez said, he was a Jew, this guy's a Jew, he said the resurrection is a fact because of this reason. The early church people, the disciples, ran away at the time of Jesus' death. They gave up. And then suddenly, a few days later, they're appearing in Jerusalem preaching with boldness. And he said, because of this fact, and he's a Jew, he never became a Christian. He says, because of this fact, Jesus rose from the dead. Okay? You have to explain why the disciples gave up and then suddenly were preaching in Jerusalem. The only explanation that you can have is that Jesus literally rose from the dead. The third issue is the enemies of Jesus becoming Christians. How do you explain that? How do you explain Paul and James and others that were enemies of the Christian faith at his time became Christians? And fourth, how do you explain the birth of the early church? These people were Jewish people. What made them go from Orthodox Jews to preaching this Messiah? And number five, how come the early church was preaching in Jerusalem? If they had seen illusions of Jesus, then all the people had to do, the Sanhedrin or the Roman authorities, was to actually bring the body out, and their visions would have been proved wrong. Why were they preaching in Jerusalem? If they were lying or if they were deluded, they would not preach in Jerusalem, because the authorities would have brought the body out. Okay, so those reasons alone show us that Christ rose from the dead, and naturalist explanation can't explain those reasons. Okay, and Gomez actually said it's a fact that Christ rose from the dead. He never became a Christian, but he recognized the power of those evidences. So we've only got a few more minutes. The arguments about we have to prove there is a God, we don't have to prove there is a God. There are good arguments for God, fine-tuned argument design. The issue here is historical evidence. We're looking at historical evidence, and the issue is, can miracles break through? Now, you don't have to believe in God or not believe in God. You have to be open-minded that, something can break through history. Quantum mechanics tells you that quantum theory A quantum mechanical understanding of the laws of nature implies that nothing is strictly impossible. Neil Shinunai, research chemist, and quoting physicist Michael Strauss. Um, Basically, you know, a miracle is a possibility in terms of we don't know fully what goes on in nature when an event happens, uh, when a causal event happens within nature. Even Hume stated that. So we should be open to phenomenon and be willing to investigate miracles. And that's the issue with the skeptics. There are no criteria from the skeptics to investigate miracles. The only person who came up with the criteria was David Hume, and he had these five criteria of understanding, 5 or 6 criteria of understanding whether a miracle took place. When he investigated the miracles by the Jainists in the time of Pascal, he came to the conclusion that the miracles actually met his criteria. Um, but he still didn't believe in the miracles. So even if you have a criteria, they won't believe. But the issue is that Dan Courtney and atheists don't have any criteria for assessing miracles, and we need to assess the miracles. We need to assess how we need a criteria for assessing miracles. Um, the issue about spiritual Jesus, quickly, that Jesus, that Paul didn't teach a spiritual, that Paul didn't teach a physical resurrection. We hit that on the head by Dr. Gundry. He says, in this regard, Gundry's landmark study, this is Giesler quoting Gundry, in this regard, Gundry's landmark study of the word used for body, soma, made it quite clear that something physical is intended. So the resurrection, when it's using the word soma by Paul, means physical, a physical resurrection. The word anastasis can only mean bodily resurrection. This word is used 44 times in the New Testament. Giesler says, in the significance of Christ's physical resurrection, that's in his article, that information. We could go on. So we've looked at some of the information about the physical resurrection of Christ. What else is there? We've got a couple of minutes left. Contradictions. The issue about the day, what day Christ was killed. If you look at the Talmud, it tells you that a day can be seen, half a day can be seen as a day. So the calculation of what day Christ was crucified has to be done with that Talmud understanding of time. That's how you answer those kind of contradictions. The last thing, the issue concerning Joseph Smith and the Mormons. The difference there is we know that they were lying. I've talked to one of the top apologists of the Mormons in the UK, and he admitted that there are no facts for the Book of Mormon. There's no information or factual information about the travel from Jerusalem to America and people living in America. So we know that these witnesses are lying, where there is tons of factual information about the Gospels. Luke is mentioning people like Tiberius, Herod. He mentions in the book of Acts 44 various characters and different offices in the Roman world, and gets it correct every time. So we know that these people are talking about their times, and we know all this historical information is correct. And it's a different kettle of fish concerning that and the Book of Mormon. And so your argument there, Dan, is just very, very poor, very, very weak. Finally, you get your arguments about the spiritual Jesus from Earl Horty. He's a major influence on this idea. He has no PhD. He hasn't even got an MA. He's not even accepted by the scholarly world. He's a bit of a crank. Richard Carrier, who promotes this, who's the main scholar, I have studied his work, I've looked at his sources. Every time I look at his sources, he gets his sources wrong. Okay, you're building an argument on very bad scholarship. Also, another guy who promoted this, Dr. Wells, a German scholar, has renounced these kind of ideas because he realised they're so bad. So you're basing your scholarship on very, very poor scholarship, whereas I based my scholarship on mainstream scholars who are accepted by atheist and non-atheist. Okay, so that's my basic argument to Dan Courtney. Alright, hope that's been a help. Also, I just want to say I've gone over my time, but I'll just for a few seconds on the issue of miracles. You know, also this issue about uniformity of nature with David Hume. There's a couple of issues there. Number one, it's a circular argument. Resurrections don't happen because they don't happen. That's circular. One-off events can give us information. For example, the issue of the rise of the universe is a one-off event, but we can investigate that. Okay, it doesn't have to be a uniform thing that goes on and on repeatable, like in a scientific study, a repeatable scientific methodology. We can look at one-off events. So you can't use the uniformity of nature as an argument. Also, there are epistemological issues. Dr. Swinburne has pointed out problems with Kant and Hume on causality, that their empiricism is a very limited epistemology in saying an event and in describing causal events, because there are things that we can know for sure that we know, not based on scientific investigation. For example, how many scientific peer reviews have been done on your eyes that you have eyes? Nothing. But yet you know you've got eyes. So in other words, David Hume's empiricism lacks a variety of epistemologies that you can have, and it's very limited in its scope. Also, there have been studies in miracles by Dr. Keener, scientific studies that have shown that miracles do take place. So also there's been the issue of Western epistemology using empiricism not being fair to other epistemologies in other parts of the world. So there's been a colonial elitist attitude to epistemology with the empiricists. Okay, so those are my basic thoughts about your video, Dan. So that's it really. I could go into detail. So basically, just to recap, the argument, Dan, is simply this: that all the basic facts of the historical Christ are in place. We have that, and basically it's just an argument of which person, which worldview is interpreting the evidence. Okay, and that's the final thing I want to say. I've gone over my time, but this can be my rebuttal part of the video for a few minutes. Basically, the issue really ultimately is not about evidence. The evidence is there for the Christian faith and Christ rising from the dead. It's not about proving God. Okay, you don't have to prove God to prove the resurrection, because it's about history. It's about looking at history and investigating history, and you've got to have a criteria. My criteria that I have used for my understanding of Christ has been the criteria of what historians use. I have a criteria here. By Licona. Number one, explanatory scope, explanatory power, plausibility, less ad hoc. Those are basic ideas that historians use in investigating history. And so unless you've got a criteria to investigate history, then you're not really going to get anywhere. And in your video, we didn't see a criteria. We didn't see any scholarly criteria for how to investigate history. The task that is confronting us is to investigate the historical Christ, and you didn't show any awareness of any of the source material of the time of Christ. You didn't show any awareness of the scholars that have done work on this. In your video, you showed a picture of A.W. Pink's book. A.W. Pink is not a New Testament scholar. He's a great Bible scholar, fundamentalist Bible scholar, but he is not a great New Testament scholar. And I have used, and you use that as a picture to show that you've looked at the scholarship in this area, but that shows that you really haven't looked at the scholarship in this area. A.W. Pink is a straw man. He's not really, he's a great Bible scholar and I love the guy, but he's not in the league of these people when it comes to New Testament scholarship. Okay? So you're behind in that area. Whoops. And so the task is the historical investigation, looking at Tacitus, looking at Josephus, looking at Clement, looking at the Greek dynamizing gods, so-called, looking at their hymns, which I have done, looking at their ancient books, looking at Hume's scholarship. I've been looking at epistemology and the scholars who have commentated on David Hume. It's a historical task. It's a philosophical task, but it's certainly not. It's not a task that the way you've described it. You've not engaged in the scholarship that is required on this topic in any shape or form. All you've done is you've used Richard Carrier, Earl Doughty, maybe Dr. Price. You've used them uncritically, and Bart Ehrman in an uncritical way. And the issue really is a historical issue of how we understand the historical information. And maybe a debate about miracles, alright, philosophically speaking. The other issue, the third issue, is about worldviews. It's important to note that everybody looks at history in a biased way. Everybody has got an agenda. Ancient historians had an agenda, the gospel writers have an agenda, atheists have an agenda, Christians have an agenda. This is a key book on this issue, okay? This is hermeneutics and understanding knowledge in epistemology, okay? That's by Continuum Impacts, okay? So everybody's got an agenda. So we're all going to look at history in a biased way, and we're going to interpret the facts in a biased way. So part of the issue is whose worldview is best in understanding the facts. Now, your worldview, Dan, you failed to present a hypothesis. You failed to present a workable hypothesis about the facts that we know. We know for sure that Christ died on a cross. This is undisputed, alright? Mainstream scholarship does not dispute this. We know he died on a cross. We know he was buried in a tomb. We know the disciples saw visions of Jesus. We know all these things. So you have got to come up with a credible hypothesis of how your theory fits these facts, and you have not done that. You've not even begun to done that. You went off on a tangent with the Mormon stuff, which is irrelevant. You've got to look at the facts about Jesus and give a plausible explanation about those facts. Now, the miracle that we're saying that Jesus rose from the dead fits that information, and because it's in a religious context, we know also a fact that Jesus saw himself as the Son of Man, which goes back to Daniel. He quotes this more than anything, and it's a historical fact. Scholars accept this, that he saw himself as the Son of Man, which tells you that this was in a very highly charged religious context, which gives you the God part, in the sense that when we know that Jesus rose from the dead. We know it was in this religious context of a certain understanding of who Jesus thought he was, coming as the Son of Man, which can be goes back to Daniel. If you want more information on this, go halfway through Lycona's book, goes into the scholarship on this. And so basically, it's in a highly charged religious context, and that gives you the context that we can say that it was God that did it, okay? Because the two can be connected together. I mean, if Jesus is saying that he's going to rise from the dead, and this is his mission for God, and he's telling everybody he's the Son of Man, which goes back to the mission of being a mission for God, and then he rises from the dead, and we have the facts for that, then we can say that God rose Jesus from the dead. Okay? But all this is done with historical research and historical study, looking at scholars against as well as for, and we can get onto solid historiography, historical grounds. You've not done any work on this, Dan, at all. You've quoted, well, you have not quoted, but I know where you've got your scholarship from. I've checked out Richard Carrier when he's talking about the ascension of Isaiah. He quotes the text wrong there. When he's talking about Philo and about there's a early Jesus, he's quoted the text wrong there. And I could go on and on about all the times Richard Carrier's quotations of Josephus, his quotations of Philo, and the Gnostic Gospels. He gets it wrong every time. So you're basing your argument on bad scholars, and you're not actually doing the historical research. But it's about worldviews. Whose worldview is the best way to interpret the facts? And you've not given a hypothesis for these facts. And your worldview is not as strong as the Christian worldview. For example, from an atheist perspective, if you're investigating history, how do you explain free will? If you've not got free will, why are you investigating history? Because it's not you who's investigating history, you're just programmed. So there's no free will in atheism, where there is in Christianity. Everybody is morally as free choice, and so therefore, when we're investigating history, we're investigating people who can make free choices, and we can make free choices. So it makes sense to study history. Second sense to study history, if you're investigating history from an atheist perspective, how can you say in history this person is morally wrong, this person is morally right, and I'm morally right in saying that this is wrong? You can't explain morality from an atheist perspective. You know, the is or problem from nature. How do you get an is, an ought from an is? Whereas the Christian perspective is a transcendental argument on morality, that morality is rooted not in nature but in the image of God. And because we're rooted in the image of God, we are important and significant. So morality is more of a transcendental argument, and makes more sense when we're looking at history. We can say people are valuable and significant, and we can say what is right and what is wrong based on the image of God, that people are made in the image of God. Whereas you can't say that, because you're saying that people came from nature, and nature doesn't tell you what is right or wrong. Dr. Monod, Nobel Prize winner in the 1960s, talks about this issue of the is or problem. Okay. It's also the worldview, your worldview on history as a meta-narrative. There is no meta-narrative of understanding history from an atheist perspective. But all the little facts of history need to be interpreted, and you need a grand narrative to understand those facts. The Christianity has a grand narrative that God has a plan for history, whereas you don't have a meta-narrative for understanding history. So when you're looking at facts, why bother? Because history doesn't have any meaning, it doesn't have any purpose. On the area of logic, you need to be able to say this is correct or not correct from a logical point of view. As an atheist, you can account for logic. Is logic material or immaterial? Is it universal or not? If you say it's material and it's not universal, that we've invented logic, then that's what most atheists say. You can't really account for logic. If we say from a Christian perspective that the logic of the law of non-contradiction, that it is immaterial and universal, it gives us a reason why we can understand historical events and say that this is wrong, this is right from a logical basis. So basically, your worldview fails in the area of morals. It fails in the area of um, meta-narrative in history. It fails in logic, um, and other reasons as well that I've mentioned. And also, we have to appreciate that we do bring bias to the table, and the atheists have a political agenda. For example, how they persecuted Anthony Flew, who incidentally said that the Christian miracles are the best type of miracles that we could investigate, when he said that